I would have to agree with Neil. All the judges I've talked to are interested in making sure they get the right people in the right places. Sometimes they don't have the tools of that, and unfortunately, and I think I heard Mark say it, and I think I heard Tim say it, and I think I heard Victor say it, that oftentimes people end up in CBCFs or halfway houses because there's no other alternative to do the thing that the judge thinks the right thing to do, get mental health treatment, get drug treatment. I mean, I've had them tell me, well, we're sending them off to the prison because we know you give them some drug treatment. Sounds good. Unfortunately, it don't happen because there's such a long waiting list. So I think the judges want to do the right thing. I think we need to give them more tools to be able to do that. And I always believe that judges should have greater latitude in being able to individualize what happens with those individuals. I think it goes back to the admission criteria that you all speak of in reference to your particular programs. What the scarce resources that we have, and we haven't talked much about the law enforcement component. I know the communication, but from the victims advocate standpoint, what's your thoughts about selection criteria for people going into various either be community control programs or CBCFs or halfway houses? Any comments, Gail or Jack?
Well, going back to what's been said in terms of the assessment, if we've got good assessment information, we know what's available in the community, we know that we're looking to change behavior. We don't want the behavior recurring, so if we can put all of that information together, make a good decision, get somebody involved in the right program, ultimately, if it's long-term enough, we will see behavior change, we'll see victims safer.
Any other comments on the panel? We do have a question that was sent up from the audience. We'll take more of your questions. This question says, with 1 in every 25 adult Ohioans under correctional supervision in 2007, how do you suggest we change this statistic? And that came from a report I think was done by the Justice, was it Pugh? I remember reading the report that 1 in 25, Ohio was third in the nation of number of people under correctional supervision, and it was 1 of every 25 adults in Ohio was under some type of correctional supervision. And most of that, I mean, I was like Tom and Reggie this morning. I mean, I knew the numbers on probation were high, but when you start throwing in the muni probation, you really kick those numbers up. But 1 in 25, how do you suggest, what suggestions would you offer to maybe change that statistical number?
I would offer back again that it's not one bullet. It's not one program. It's a comprehensive community program, beginning in the very beginning, training police on how to diffuse the situation and perhaps not even arresting in the very beginning, and reducing the time in jail going to indictment to court, establishing mental health courts, drug courts, and having comprehensive reentry programs, and get buy-in more of treatment as opposed to incarceration, with building the confidence within the community that it's a safety issue. And incidentally, it's also an economic development issue. It's far more expensive to have folks in prison than to give them treatment on the outside. And I think then in the long run, Terry, that it helps reduce that number that is on probation.
Craig?
I think that's a staggering number. I mean, I'm not surprised by too much, but that one is. You know, I think I agree with Bill in terms of the comprehensiveness. We have a program in Cleveland. Cleveland was selected as one of 6 cities nationally to be a comprehensive anti-gang initiative city. And it had 3 components: prevention, intervention, and reentry. We've done pretty well. We reduced crime by about 45% in the target area, which is Huff Heights, which is a tough neighborhood in Cleveland. But we put as much emphasis in the prevention part. It isn't a quick fix in terms of reentry, but when you're talking 1 out of 25 adults in Ohio being under some kind of supervision, there's something fundamentally wrong at the front end. I used to be a legal director for Children's Services, and we would have, they used to say, Shea Bilderchek, who was the director of the Child Welfare League of America, said the sad child becomes a bad child. And so the same children that we were protecting in our state systems were protecting, then our state systems would be prosecuting in the juvenile courts, and then they would kind of graduate into the municipal courts after they've been bounced around foster homes and detention centers, and then they become adults and they end up in the state courts, and then they end up in DRC. I sometimes think they're so desensitized by that point that the normal kind of laws that kind of like keep us out of getting in trouble, you know, don't keep them. They've been abused, neglected children. They've been desensitized in the juvenile court, the municipal court. By the time they get to the adult system, I think it's so serious and so grave. I mean, what do they say? Cognitive behavioral therapy. I think that's right. But what does that mean? And do we have the resources? We heard today that we're reducing alcohol and drug money in those areas, mental health money in those areas. You hear Dr. Fabella said, there are those who are going to make it no matter what you do and those who are not going to make it. So do you get to a point where you're just going to say there's certain people that are so damaged through oftentimes no fault of their own? What do you do? I mean, are those where you put those in prison because you couldn't get to them, you couldn't save them early enough? I don't mean to get preachy, but I mean it is kind of it's overwhelming in many ways.
Other comments about the 1 in 25 Ohioans under correctional supervision?
Well, I think for African-American males, it's 1 in 4, I think is the number. It's 1 in 8, 9, 1 in 9. It's obviously a much more serious issue in the black community for lots of reasons, one of which is economic. And I think that if we really want to solve this, we do have to be thinking about jobs and poverty. And I know that's not always popular to talk about, but it is the truth that poverty drives a lot of crime, and we have to start addressing that in new and different ways too. And I agree, it's not, with Bill, it's not one bullet. There isn't a single answer here, but if we don't address that component of the jobs and poverty issues, we are going to really fighting this in you know, with all groups of offenders. But I think we need to get some real focus in certain areas.
Other comments, Jack?
Yeah, I think a lot of these folks go back to prison because they just lose all hope. You know, if you're 30 years old and you have severe mental illness and you've got substance abuse issues, and now you've got a felony record and you can't find employment and you're having trouble finding housing and you're just lost out there, people do give up hope. And sometimes I've heard people say, you know, I know of situations where people went out and committed crimes intentionally to get back into the prison system because they felt so abandoned by the community. And, you know, we have to do better than that. I know of a specific case of a client about a year ago who stole a SUV because he told me about it a week before he was going to do it. He didn't say what vehicle, but and then he went out and did it. So.
Well, there's one amazing thing about the system of criminal justice in this state. It interacts with so many other things. I think that same report that talked about the 1 in 25 talked about what you talked about, Neil. Reduction in the number of high school dropouts, real jobs with real wages, and keeping families together will reduce your incarceration rates, and therefore those people it's under correctional supervision. Another question.
Terry, just one comment,
yeah, Neil.
too. The cost of a high school dropout to society is about $350,000 in terms of public assistance costs, treatment costs, incarceration costs, et cetera. So if we really want to solve this thing, we really do have to start much younger at trying to solve this because that's a huge cost. You know, that would be, what's the cost of incarceration, about 25 a year?
About 26 a year.
Yeah, okay. So
Maybe it went down since I left.
12 or 13. It went up since you left?
Maybe probably went down.
But that's 12 or 13 years of incarceration costs for a high school dropout. So it's just something else to think about, that we really do need to address that.
We have another question. It says, what about the felony 4s and 5s who have pled down from F2s and F3s violent offenses? What do we do about them as they have pled down to F4, F5? And it would add to that then they would fall under typically coming in for 9 months, 10 months, and coming back out certainly creates a different type individual. And maybe to add to that, about 98% of the people who come in the state prison system come in as a result of some type of plea bargain. So any comments about what do we do with those individuals? I mean, I think it's part of it is the assessment of those individuals and our tools that we have to have and to use.
that was where I was going to go with it, is I think the ORAS will be kind of, again, hoping that it will be the equalizer for that. It will allow us to take a look at the historical, criminogenic needs, the things that have happened, their criminal history, all those kinds of things that will factor into it. And again, hopefully, if this is the evaluation tool that follows the person from beginning all the way through any kind of programming that they're going to receive, those kinds of static numbers shouldn't change. And so hopefully that will, despite the plea bargain, get us to the true risk level of the individual.
Any other comments? We talked earlier today about a fragmented probation system. Who gets on, who gets off, how we control them, how we supervise them. I can only assume that in the positions you all hold, halfway house, CBCFs, victim advocates, CEOs, that the probation in your particular county or particular area has a significant impact on your operations. What kind of principles would you see put in place to maybe bring some consistency to probation supervision? What would you think would be an ideal situation of that nature? Who wants to jump first? Neil? I know Neil can do this.
I got an opinion about everything.
He's got an opinion about everything.
I think this morning that we discussed, was discussed with us anyhow, but with the report, that some sort of standardization has to occur. I think the organization I work for probably deals with maybe 8 or 10 different probation departments, and they're all different, and some are outstanding and some are not so good. And you get different kind of information. Sometimes you get a PSI because that court wants to release it. Other times you don't. Sometimes you get information from the institution. Sometimes you don't. That's improved over recent years for sure. But you really have to get some sort of standardization and the kind of information that's going to be shared first and foremost with treatment organizations if you want them to do the job. Once again, I'm going to use the health analogy. It's pretty tough to go to a physician when you have a serious health problem and say, I'm not going to share anything that these other doctors learned about me with you, and you have to start all over again. We would never want that to happen. I mean, we know best practice in healthcare is to try to get electronic records and try to make that happen. The same thing should happen in criminal justice. We should try to share whatever information we can. So that'd be a starting point for me, is to try to share information right from the start. I think coming up with levels of supervision, who needs what kind of supervision, to be another approach we could take. But there's probably a dozens, and I know the Texas consultant talked about some of the things they had done in I guess Travis County that all seem to make sense to me. So I would encourage us to move in that direction.
I would offer that we're all pretty good at what we do individually, but collectively there are times that we don't work well together. And one of the things in this whole business of the criminal justice system is that we have to learn how to collaborate more. And when we collaborate more and share information, share data, it has extraordinary results. I remember a situation about a year ago when we were following the rules on releasing information per HIPAA, when we find out the information they were asking for had nothing to do with HIPAA. And when we figured it out, we began to coordinate and deal with information that was attainable, and it helped the system because we were coordinating better. And I think that why we're suggesting all these things, there are so many different entities in behavioral health and the courts and law enforcement and the community, jobs and housing and all that individually we do a pretty good job, but collectively we're learning we have to rely on one another because that one person is dealing with all of us, not individually but collectively.
I agree with both Neil and Bill. We need the standardization, we need the coordination, the collaboration. I think that if we want the community to support everything that we're doing, we also need to make sure, and I think, Neil, you said it in terms of the levels of supervision. Well, what does that mean? Earlier we said, if somebody's on probation, there could be different levels, different activities involved with that. We need to communicate that to our larger communities, to our victim communities, and in that way you'll get all the support, or more support than you're currently receiving, and we're all going to be working toward that same outcome, that same end, and hopefully be much more successful in what we're doing for the larger community.
The example that was shown today on the grid with all the different probation departments, again, with our 14 counties, we're dealing with about 20 different probation agencies by the time you do the APA, and then you also do some of our county facilities, our county control probation. That used to be, we used to have a liaison officer assigned to us about 4 hours a week that would help take the 106 offenders and then kind of funnel that information back out into the home counties to whatever department it needed to be. Due to budget cuts with DRC, that has ceased to be. So now I've got staff dealing with 20 different probation departments to try to get everything all accomplished. I think it's just indicative that sometimes budget cuts and the allocation of resources as it dwindles in one level continues that trickle-down effect and just kind of makes the communication worse. And there's no question that things get lost in that situation, and I think are going to help, ultimately not make the public as safe, get the information out there, get the conditions of supervision out there. So we've got some concerns about that. But I think the ability to kind of streamline that's going to be very important to the success of these programs.
I think one of the things that the entire study done by CSG, and I think the data is showing it, that we can reinvest dollars by collaboration, getting guiding principles, getting more people on, so we're not doing 15 things 15 different ways, but all doing it the same way. Maybe can help with the, giving some money to those areas that we know are Angie and Sandy and all those individuals that we know need the treatment, which we know works. I have another question. What do we do about nonviolent individuals who have more than one felony or 2 misdemeanors on their record and get their record sealed even though they served their time and were released from prison for at least 5 years? I'm reading the question exactly as it was written, so. I'm assuming that because they were sealed that they couldn't be used, or I'm not sure that they were talking about whether the question, whether they should be sealed and not be used in expungement process. Anybody have any ideas, any comments you'd like to make about those individuals who have gotten out and done well for at least 5 years?
Well, I wouldn't exclude them. I mean, my sense is that they either have alcohol and substance abuse, addiction, or mental illness, or both. And somehow treatment, for a whole lot of reasons, have excluded them and ensure somehow, some way, that they at least get behavioral health treatment. And maybe by that interaction, we could help change that individual's life. And not maybe, we know it works. So given the statistics earlier that we know, the penal system in Ohio and across the country is the largest mental health hospital in America, and the alcohol and substance abuse that we have is there. So the chances are likely that this person, not to mischaracterize them, but chances are pretty likely that they'll have one of these diseases that, if properly dealt with, that we could help reduce that trend this individual's on.
Greg?
Could you repeat the question? Was it an expungement issue?
What do we do about nonviolent individuals who have more than one felony or 1 misdemeanor on their record and get their record sealed? Even
Cannot.
Yeah, but that's not what it says.
Yeah.
I'm retired and I'm getting old, but on their record and get their record sealed. And I think that's what maybe have been meant. They can't get their record sealed. I think it's about expungement and sealing of records.
Right now, you can get one felony under certain conditions expunged, but you can't get more than two. In fact, I thought Shirley Smith was working on something along that line, because a lot of these.
Oh, okay.
Well, you can't have it expunged. It will be on your record. I mean, that's the problem now. And a lot of people that get to that point, it's almost what I said before, by the time they go, well, you can get one felony expungement in your record. They say, that's great, I've got 6. I mean, so one doesn't mean much.
I think we're talking about those individuals who have nonviolent records. There's some expungement now, but should we extend expungement? Does that help those individuals reintegrate? Should your record always be held against you forever?
Currently, the law is what it is, but there are efforts underway to talk about certificates of achievement and reintegration and completion of treatment, things like that, that are meaningful to some people. The chief reason to get something expunged is usually for an employment reason. If we could engage the business community in discussion about what would be meaningful to them in terms of hiring an ex-offender, what would make a difference. And most of what the Chamber of Commerce folks have said is the next best thing would be to have some sort of certificate that would show that they have completed treatment, that they have reintegrated appropriately or achieved some sort of achievement in some meaningful way in the community. And I think, is Cuyahoga County doing something, Bill? Do they have a certificate of achievement or reintegration, good conduct, whatever it is? There's different processes around the state, around the country for that matter, trying to deal with this in a little different way.
I don't think that ever, we've tried to get some legislation on that. Maybe in 22 was part of that. I'm not sure, Senator Seitz, about good conduct and the certificates. I know we worked on that. I don't think it's ever gotten to the point, put in another plug for Senate Bill 22, but that is is an important component when you look at the whole arena of criminal justice in this state and dealing with individuals, particularly those misdemeanor cases that have that held against them employment and all that. We have time for one last question, and I have that question. It says, after taking time served into consideration, some offenders serve only days or weeks in DRC. Should offenders not go to prison unless they have a minimum amount of time left? Anyone care to comment in reference to that question?
Well, the most expensive days are is the intake process, and I saw something, I guess it was either in the paper this morning or wherever, that the daily cost was $300 for men and $800 for women, I think it was, for just that additional cost. If someone's going to be there for less than a certain amount of time, it might be appropriate for them to serve that time in the county jail or in some sort of residential program in the community that would ensure adequate supervision, punishment, and care. The transitional costs of sending someone upstate or downstate, depending on where you're from, going to the intake center at Orient if you're a man, or Marysville if you're a woman, I guess, and that whole process, all the medical tests, all the things, and no programming being available because you're there for such a short amount of time, does seem to call into question why someone goes up there for just a matter of weeks and days. So I would, as a professional, would support that greatly, that we try to have a floor, a minimum that would stop that from happening.
I know Director Moore is working with our Cuyahoga County Sheriff's Department on a pilot program, which is being very well received, that if, I think it's 9 months or less, then you would remain in Cuyahoga County in jail and you would not go downstate, which is, I think it's great. It keeps people connected with the community. And it's also an incentive for us to keep them in Cuyahoga County. So it's working great. So we think it's a good idea.
Well, I can tell you from experience, $200 just to bring somebody in the system if you're male, $400 if you're female. So whether you stay one day or for the rest of your life, that's a fixed cost that's there. And oftentimes people are let out the same day they come in. When you start looking at their jail credit time, they get out that come in. I used to kid some county sheriffs about they got back to the county before your cruiser did. So
Well, they say jail time is much more difficult time than prison time, but if you're there for such a short amount of time, you're really doing jail time if you're only there for 30 or 60
Right.
days at the institution, because you're really pretty well confined and under not really in any programming, so, or recreation or anything else.
Well, with that, our time is up. I want to thank our panel for their expertise, and we'll turn the program back over to Mark. Thank you.